Upon further inspection, she realized that the tall humanoid creature was no longer on top of the water tower. With a sickening jolt, she suddenly realized that the creature was now standing only a few feet away from her. Its face was completely white, and its lips were a dark red. And to Debbie, it almost looked as if the creature was wearing clown makeup. As it stared at them, a gleeful smirk began to stretch across its face. And it gave Giovanni the impression that it was basically saying, "I got you." Without warning though, the silence was suddenly broken as two loud bangs rang out through the night air. It turns out Giovanni's friend had seen enough and had raised his pistol and fired off 2 clean shots at the creature. Hello everyone and welcome back to the Firelight. Today we're going to be exploring 2 different encounters with a horrifying flying humanoid-like creature that is rarely discussed and incredibly difficult to categorize. I mean, even if you're into cryptids and creature sightings and all that kind of stuff, you've still probably never heard of this thing before. Is it an unknown cryptid or demon? Or could it be responsible for the Mothman sightings? Or is it just an extension of the fairy folk? Whatever this enigma is, one thing is for sure, it's nightmare inducing. So stick around and you'll see what I mean by that. Really quick though, if you're new here, please like and subscribe to the channel. I'm trying to actually get to 1,000 subscribers, so any help I can get along the way is greatly, greatly appreciated. Okay, now that we got that out of the way, we have some amazing encounters to get into, so get comfortable, grab a snack, and let's get in the glow. Before we start, I want to quickly announce that both of these encounters that we're going to be discussing today can be found on the late Brenton Salwin's channel. So if you want to check that out, there's a link below. Encounters with flying humanoids go way back. The most popular, of course, being the Mothman, which became prevalent in the northeastern side of the United States in the late 1960s. The first witness described the Mothman as being a slender, muscular man about 7 feet tall with white wings. Now this might sound different than contemporary depictions of the Mothman, but it does closely fit with the description of the creature that we're going to be discussing today. Our first story takes place in South Texas. The witness Debbie was returning home from visiting her husband who, at the time, worked and lived in a different part of the state. Now it was a long drive back to her remote country home, and since it was late at night, she decided to call her aunt to keep her mind awake. She was just pulling off the highway to turn down the old country road that led to her driveway when she decided it's probably best to let her aunt go to bed, since at this point it was about 11 o'clock at night. Now at the start of this road, Debbie would habitually roll down the window so that she could enjoy the sights and the smells of the forest on her half-mile drive through the woods. So she rolled down the window, but rather than hearing the wind blowing through the trees or the crickets chirping, she heard something different, something strange. And what she heard sounded like it was coming from a group of people and was a disturbing mixture of wailing and chanting. Alarmed by this, she stopped the truck. Glancing around frantically, it didn't take her long to discover the source of the commotion. Only a short distance away was a small water tower that fed into the local ranches. I believe the image you're looking at right now is the exact water tower. Now on top of the tower, Debbie could clearly see that something strange was taking place. Now she can't remember if there was a full moon that night or if there was just an otherworldly glow present, but she could clearly see what was happening, and what she saw left her confused and frightened to her core. On top of the water tower was a group of large black birds similar in appearance to crows or ravens. The birds all had white faces and a white tuft of feathers on their chest. The birds stood together in a circle and were moving around in unnatural ways that seemed to Debbie to be a dance. All the while they were chanting and screaming in a way that Debbie later described as ritualistic. The most shocking part of all, however, was their size. Debbie estimated that each bird was as tall as her, around 5.5 feet tall. After taking this all in, Debbie soon realized that there was another creature standing in the circle, and this one was much taller than the birds. The creature also looked different from the rest. It was more human-like, and it was standing stark still, looking directly back at her. Debbie had just been able to process all that was going on when she noticed that the chanting had stopped. Upon further inspection, she realized that the tall humanoid creature was no longer on top of the water tower. With a sickening jolt, she suddenly realized that the creature was now standing only a few feet away from her. Upon thinking back later, Debbie couldn't understand how it got down to her so fast. She's sure that it didn't fly or jump off the tower. One minute it was looking at her from the water tower, and the next it was standing only about 3 feet away from her. Paralyzed with fear, Debbie sat, shocked, staring at the horrifying creature in front of her. The humanoid creature was about 6.5 feet tall and was completely covered in black feathers. On its back were 2 gigantic wings that folded back and ended near its ankles. Its face was completely white, and its lips were a dark red. And to Debbie, it almost looked as if the creature was wearing clown makeup. Now its eyes were human-like, but solid black. The creature stood absolutely still, staring at Debbie. Now, Debbie always carried a firearm with her in the truck, but she was so paralyzed with fear that she couldn't get herself to reach for it. As if reading her thoughts, an otherworldly smile formed on the creature's face. And to Debbie, it looked as if the smile was stretching from ear to ear. Suddenly, it threw its head back and laughed deeply. The sound of the laughter disturbed her, but she barely had time to think of that because the creature suddenly lurched forward and pressed its head through her open window so that it was only inches away from her own. After a few moments of staring back into its black eyes, the creature, as if pleased with itself, backed up, took a few steps, and disappeared. Needless to say, Debbie was left reeling from the experience. She sat there in shock for only a few moments before she once again heard the sound of chanting and dancing. She looked back up at the water tower and, sure enough, the creature was once again standing in the middle of the circle. Gasping, she slammed on the gas and started heading down the old road as quickly as possible. She quickly called the caretaker that was taking care of her home while she was gone and asked that he please meet her at the front gate. She stressed that she just saw something that scared her so badly that she couldn't talk about it, but that the gate needed to be opened and unlocked ASAP. You see, she was only about a minute away from her front gate and, understandably, didn't want to get out of her vehicle to unlock it. Debbie soon found herself driving through the open gate with the caretaker waiting nearby. He ran up to her as soon as she got out of the car and was clearly worried about her and asked her what took her so long. Confused, Debbie asked what he was talking about, as it only took her about a minute to get to the property after hanging up the phone. The caretaker, however, told her that it had actually been much longer than a minute. In fact, it had been nearly an hour. Shocked by this revelation, Debbie quickly pulled out her phone to check the time and realized that it was now close to midnight. So how did she end up losing an hour of her life, and what exactly took place during the missing time? If this was an alien or fae abduction, we might have some idea. Most likely a physical examination of sorts would have taken place. However, I can't imagine these creatures being interested in human anatomy and physiology. The more I look into this encounter, in fact, the less I'm able to put a popular label on this creature. To me, this doesn't sound like your typical alien abduction encounter, or even the sighting of an unknown cryptid for that matter. Everything from the ritualistic ceremony, its ability to teleport from place to place, and coupled with Debbie's missing time, really seems like something more is going on here. Without further information, however, we're just left to speculate. In any case, while the creature in this encounter was seemingly satisfied to let its would-be victim go, the creature in our next encounter certainly wasn't. Our next encounter takes place in Puerto Rico in 1995. The witness, Giovanni, was part of a fraternity that had decided to take some initiates out for what he deemed a woodland adventure, which was really just supposed to be a fun retreat in the woods. He had just returned from basic training and was eager to put some of his new skills to the test and give some of the initiates a good scare that night. So that night, after they set up camp, it was announced that they would all be going on a hike through the dark forest. Giovanni and his close friend, who also happened to be a cop, were already dressed in camo and waiting in the woods, eagerly waiting for the initiates to pass by. And it wasn't long before the group arrived and the scaring commenced. He describes it as just a good time, with the initiates running around and hiding while Giovanni and his friend pursued them through the woods. It almost sounds like they were playing a game of flashlight tag. So once the game was over, they rounded up all the initiates and led them back to camp. In an attempt to make sure that nobody was left behind, Giovanni and his friend decided to return to the forest for one last look. They hiked back about a half a mile into the woods, calling out for stragglers, but found nobody. So, satisfied that all the initiates had made it back to camp, they decided it was best that they return themselves. They had just started back, however, when their journey was suddenly interrupted. Giovanni explained that out of nowhere, there was an incredible whooshing sound just over their heads, as if a giant bird had flown over them and just missed them. He even saw a shadow pass by on the moonlit ground as he and his friend ducked down instinctively to avoid whatever it was. In the next instant, a loud crashing sound could be heard just behind them, and whatever it was, it sounded big, and it sounded like it hit the ground pretty hard. Giovanni and his friend both stood and faced the source of the loud crashing sound, and what they saw left them frozen in fear. Only about 20 yards away from them stooped a large figure. It was bent over and resting on one knee. One of its long arms were extended out and touching a nearby tree as if using the tree for a brace. Its back was turned facing the two men, and it clearly had what looked like two large bat wings protruding out of its shoulders and folded down near its ankles. Slowly, the creature began standing up to its full height. Now, Giovanni's cop friend was around 6 feet tall, and whatever this thing was, it was at least a foot taller than he was. The creature was completely black, but unlike Debbie's encounter, it didn't have any feathers, but was instead covered in a dark skin much like a bat. Now, as it slowly stood up, it whipped its head around and looked directly at the two men. Both of them were stunned by what they saw. The creature had a completely white face, and much like Debbie, it reminded Giovanni of clown makeup, and the eyes of the creature were pitch black and focused on the men. The creature also had two ram horns that protruded out of the top of its head and curled around its face. As it stared at them, a gleeful smirk began to stretch across its face, and it gave Giovanni the impression that it was basically saying, "I got you." The smile was unnatural, and Giovanni would later describe that it was too wide, and it stretched from ear to ear. For a moment, they just stood there, frozen in fear. During this time, Giovanni's mind was racing and trying to make sense of it all. And I don't know about you, but I can only imagine what he must have been going through in that moment. Can you picture yourself staring back at the creature, locking eyes with it, while the sound of the forest disappears and the only thing audible is the sound of your heart racing in your chest? In those moments, time seems to stand still. Without warning though, the silence was suddenly broken as two loud bangs rang out through the night air. It turns out Giovanni's friend had seen enough and had raised his pistol and fired off 2 clean shots at the creature. Now the blast actually broke Giovanni out of his stupor, and he screamed for them both to run. Now as they're running, his friend stops and turns and fires off 3 more shots at the creature, which, by the sound of the cracking trees and the branches, was clearly in pursuit. The shots did little to slow the creature down apparently, as Giovanni could clearly hear the sound of the creature crashing through the forest after them. Now after a few seconds of running, Giovanni had the sickening realization that in the heat of the moment, they'd gotten themselves lost. So they just kept themselves running forward, but were quickly losing hope with each stride. Suddenly, out of nowhere, Giovanni picked up on a familiar smell, and it was the smell of cigarette smoke, and he knew it had to be their camp. So with hope renewed, both of the men took off towards the smell. Before they knew it, they were clambering out of the woods and found themselves in a clearing. The sounds of pursuit suddenly died off. Not far away, they could clearly see their friends having a smoke near the campsite. Wasting no time, both men rushed to rejoin their company, bewildered and just grateful to be alive. I just realized I forgot to start my little campfire. So what exactly is this white-faced creature? After doing a bit of research for the video, I really wasn't able to come up with much outside of these 2 encounters. I did find a news article, however, from 2018 that mentioned an encounter that took place in Houston, Texas back in the 1950s, which was covered by the Houston Chronicle. In the encounter, 3 witnesses claimed that they came face to face with what they can only call a Batman. Hilda Walker and her 2 neighbors were all having a conversation on her front porch when they all noticed something large and dark moving nearby. What they saw appeared to be a humanoid standing about 6.5 feet tall, moving across the yard. On the creature's back were 2 large bat wings, and it appeared to emit a strange glowing light all around its body. The onlookers explained that they all froze up as if they were deer caught in headlights. After a few moments, the light surrounding the creature began to fade, and before long, it had disappeared completely. So there we have it, another strange encounter with a bird or bat-like humanoid in Texas. On a side note, while scouring the internet, I came across the words, 9 seriously horrifying reasons to fear the bald-faced ... Now with my one-track mind, I thought this was going to be referring to the creature, bald-faced, of course referring to its painted white face. After clicking on the article, however, I realized that it was talking about bald-faced hornets. So for now, I'm just gonna call this thing the bald-faced devil. Now, it's not a great name, I know, but if you can think of a better name, please let me know in the comments below. Also, let me know if you have any topics that you would like me to cover in the future. Also, if you want some more strange encounter stories, watch this video here. Or here, I don't know which side it's on. It details a strange encounter with the Fae by well-known poet W.B. Yeats. All right, everybody, until next time, thank you so much for watching and have a great day.